Sean, now we are going to debut a segment that takes us back to our roots. Yes. A segment that I think will connect us with the truest parts of ourselves, and that is a new segment called The Monthly 10. This will be a segment where every month we're going to do a top 10 list. But we're not doing it like the old way where we spend 2 hours going back and forth on, something that we've put a lot of work into. This is going to be a top 10 list as a challenge, as a game. Every month we're going to switch off, and one of us is going to challenge the other person to make a top 10 list of something we have decided, and the next month that person is going to have to come back with that top 10 list. For this month, we couldn't do that because it's the first episode, so I decided I would take this one and I would make it slightly self-promotional and make it kind of navel-gazing, and I'm going to rank for you guys the top 10 episodes of the Weekly Stuff podcast, and at the end of this segment, I'm going to challenge Sean to make a much sillier top 10 list for our October episode.
All right, I'm ready.
All right, so Sean, here are my I'm just curious how much you'll agree with these, but these are, I think, looking over the 500 episodes we did, the top 10 episodes I would give to someone to show, I think, the quality of our podcast, but also to get to know us. Mm-hmm. And I think I made a good list in terms of variety. So here we go. My number 10 favorite Weekly Stuff podcast is episode 482, which is the Rob Zombie's Halloween episode. I like both of the Halloween episodes we did. We did one on John Carpenter's Halloween the year before. But the Rob Zombie one kind of meant something special to me because I went into it feeling very vulnerable. Halloween 2 is a movie, Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 is a movie I really, really love, but is kind of maligned in certain circles, and I wasn't sure how Sean would feel. And I'd also had kind of this isn't on the recording, but I just from outside of it, I had also kind of had a shitty mental health week and had to bail on watching the first zombie film because I just kind of couldn't handle it and almost called the whole thing off. I mean, I'd seen the movie before, but Sean you encouraged us to go through with it, and I listened to it, that episode again recently for a different project I'm doing, and I think it's a really rich, cool conversation about two really weird movies that I don't think there's a lot of, in-depth reappraisals of lately, but I think there should be. And so that's an episode I'm proud of. And if I hadn't re-listened to it lately, I don't know if I would have put that on there. But I think it's actually a really good conversation we had.
Yeah, I like that one a lot. I mean, it's fun to talk about something that's obscure, but not in the Japanese anime kind of way. Yes. Compared to doing podcasts on the Spider-Man movies or something that are so well known, the Rob Zombie Halloween movies can feel kind of forgotten because they have now been sandwiched within the Halloween franchise itself. So yeah, I really like doing that one, and it was fun to just watch those movies because I had not seen them before.
Yeah. My number 9 is episode 315, which is Japan Quest, Jonathan's Great Adventure.
Yeah.
This is a very simple one. I got back from my trip to Japan, and I had documented it pretty meticulously, and I basically talked Sean through my whole adventure day by day, and I spent a ton of time editing the video version of this one to include all the photos that I had. So it is kind of like this video diary of this really special vacation I took, and I'm just glad that exists for my own edification and for the future, and it's a nice document of a really special time. And that's something that is cool about podcasting, too, is getting to be able to do that.
Yeah, that's a good one. I every once in a while, I think about the video of you singing Stand Up to the Victory in karaoke.
It's in there.
Good. Yeah.
Yeah. My number 8 is episode 195. This is from the stretch where Doctor Who Series 10, Twin Peaks The Return, and Persona 5 were all coming out at the same time, which I think you and I have agreed several times was our favorite period ever doing the Weekly Stuff, because that was such a dense, cool time. And episode 195 just so happens to be the one where Twin Peaks Part 8, which is the one with the nuke, and Doctor Who Season 10, Episode 11, which is World Enough in Time, aired the same week, and that is that podcast. I haven't gone back and listened to that, but I don't know if two things we love ever coincided that fucking hard all at once. Because it's not quite the peak of Doctor Who Series 10, because I think that's probably the Doctor Falls the week after that. But by God, World Enough in Time had some, that's where Bill gets fucking shot in the chest and becomes a Cyberwoman.
Yeah, I mean, that's where you get to have Peter Capaldi look into camera and go, Mondasian Cyberman. And be yes, they're doing it.
Yeah, and Twin Peaks: The Return Part 8 may be the best episode of TV to air in this century. So, holy shit, I'm amazed we got to do all of that season. This episode is standing in for those, but that was fun.
Yeah, what a confluence of events that was. It's like, man, we were really feasting good there, not knowing that, in the not so distant future from that point, Doctor Who was going to take a very dark turn.
Yes. My number 7 is number 223, which is our review of Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace.
Yes.
This was a kickoff of a series we did of re-reviewing all 6 original Star Wars movies. But we originally just kind of wanted to do the prequels because obviously the prequels are very maligned in many places, and we don't agree with that. But I think I'm really proud of all 3 of those episodes we did on the prequels because I think we did a very cogent job defending those movies. And I actually used this episode specifically, the Phantom Menace one, in a class once because a friend asked me to come in and talk about podcasting and share a clip, and I cut down probably a 10-minute clip of this episode. And I thought it was really good, and I thought we did a really good job. I think in part because we knew we kind of had to have our game faces on if we were going to go into a podcast and say, we think The Phantom Menace is a good movie. And I think we did it. I think we did a good job, and I'm proud of that and the other Star Wars ones, and also just all the various classic movie episodes we did over the years. But I think this is a good one, in part because if you want to get to know us, well, listening to us talk about a movie a lot of people hate, I think you'll get to know us.
Yes, that's a good pick. Those Star Wars prequel ones I really, really enjoyed doing. Partially because it's like, they were fun podcasts to do, but it was like good to reclaim those movies, and that was like kind of like the sense I got coming out of that was like just being able to kind of wash the like intense, exaggerated negativity around those movies just totally off of me and be like, no, I love these movies. Like they're not perfect. They've got a lot of weird foibles to them for sure, but lots of media has weird foibles to it. And like, you can look past that for the good stuff. And sometimes you like it because of those weird foibles. And I feel like that episode just helped me kind of bring those movies back to my life.
Yes. My number 6 is episodes 350 and 351. It's a 2-parter. And this is when we did our top 10 favorite books of all time. And this is my favorite top 10 list I have on here because I think we did all the top 10s. We did video games, movies, TV shows, all of that stuff.
I mean, and we started scraping the bottom barrel of coming up with a top 10 list because we finished with top 10 openings for anime and top 10 endings for anime.
Yes.
We did it all.
Yes, we did it all. And I think when I suggested books, you kind of felt at first that it was a little bottom of the barrel scraping because I think you weren't sure if that would be an episode. And I wasn't sure either, but we tried it. And I actually think it was the most interesting of all of those because I think it was something very in a wheelhouse for you, Sean, that you don't get to talk about much. And then it pushed me to think about something that, I don't write about books every day. I write about movies. So it was cool for me to get to think about that. And honestly, my memory of this one is I really enjoyed listening to your side of the top 10 list. I enjoyed sharing mine as well. But I think that's where you got to do your whole fucking Moby Dick run on talking about the various sperm whale entendres in that book. Yes. And I think you did a whole mini top 10 within your top 10 about your 10 favorite Shakespeares. And that made me laugh. I think this is a really good one.
Yeah, I mean, I loved doing that one. It was weird to do because it's like not only was it a different top 10 list, but we just had never done an episode on books. But I just liked getting to like read out, finding some of my favorite sections in those books and sharing them. Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah. My number 5 is episode 432, the infamous 10th anniversary episode that we spent about 6 months working on, where we recorded 10-hour-long segments on 10 different things that we considered central to the life of the weekly stuff, and then strung them all together to make a big 10th anniversary 10-hour-long episode. And, that's a great one. That's one of the best we ever did.
This is definitely like the fever dream episode that sometimes I forget that we did it, and then I'm like think about like, oh, right, we did a whole, we ranked all the Dragon Ball arcs. Like, it's we did so many, cool topics in there. But, when did we do? Oh, right. Oh, my God, we did the 10-hour episode. It's because we recorded that over, a month of all these different things.
Yes.
It took so long to set up and do that it is just, it's weird to think back on because it was just a very long-term project.
There's an hour-long review of Shrek in there that was your idea, not mine, to do a Shrek episode, and so that's in there. We cut some of these out and released them as individual episodes later on, but honestly, my favorite parts of it are the ones that we could never do that with, like the one where we talked about the bad episodes of Twin Peaks Season 2, or...
I had to fucking rewatch random episodes of Twin Peaks season 2 that you like came up with the list. I'm like, ah, shit, I guess I gotta watch these now.
It was so much fun, but that one was a fever dream is the right word for it. All right, number 4 is episode 340, which is the Final Fantasy VII episode. This is the one where we talked about the original game and the first remake one, the one just called FF7 Remake. And you talked a little bit about Crisis Core. I hadn't played it at that point. The remake wasn't out yet. And we talked about Advent Children, which also included you writing a crazy skit making fun of Tetsuya Nomura in the style of a Peter Capaldi speech from Doctor Who. You had to be there. It was weird. But I actually listened to this one again maybe a year ago. I was stuck in the Denver airport overnight waiting for a morning flight, which is just a miserable evening because everything closes down. You can't like go and like there's no real good place to sleep. So you just kind of do what you can. And I was out of podcasts, so I listened to the Final Fantasy. So I have a strong association with this as like Terminal B of the Denver airport at 4 a.m. But I actually think it was a really good episode talking about not just Final Fantasy VII and why it's great, but the weird ways it's been refracted. I'm actually glad we did all of this in one episode. I think it made it more interesting than if there had been a remake episode and a PlayStation 1 FF7 episode and a Crisis Core and an Advent Children episode. I think it's one of the best like single media thing episodes we ever did because of that weird confluence.
Yeah, I really like that one. Just surprised it's like it was like a thing that, from what I remember, we didn't even like really clearly plan out that was going to be a thing. No, we did not. It's just like it just sort of happened that we were engaging with Final Fantasy VII in that way, and it was like, fuck it, like we're getting so into it. It's like, let's just do all this on a big podcast. And yeah, because you're right that it's putting it in the context of what is it for someone who we've both lived in the shadow of Final Fantasy VII, of this giant cultural like titan in the world of video games, but have never actually played it before, and like going into that for the first time with some of those preconceptions, engaging with the original game in a slightly modified form, and that's re-released that allows you to fast forward the combat, which is incredibly slow, which is nice. But then also looking at what is all the weird detritus of Final Fantasy VII and fucking Advent Children, which is a hell of a movie, and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's fun. And then it's like the prequel to our Final Fantasy VII Rebirth episode that we did relatively recently. And eventually we'll, I'm sure, talk about Final Fantasy VII again. But that was the first one.
God is my witness. I will try to avoid it, but I probably won't. All right. My number 3, we've mentioned these episodes already. It's episode 452 and 453, which were Sean and Jonathan's 30th birthday podcasts, which is where you got to pick a topic and I got to pick a topic. Yours was we spent a month watching VTuber videos and diarying about them in diarizing. What's the verb form of diary?
Writing diaries?
Writing diaries, recording diaries about our VTuber adventures, and then the other one was you had to play Chaos Monopoly with me. With Thomas was there for that one as our basically game master. Those were some weird. Those are fever dream episodes, definitely.
Yes. The VTuber one is special to me also because that's where we almost like prototyped the Endless 8 episode for Japanimation Station. Yes, we recorded those in a very similar manner. And like kind of doing these sort of like smaller recordings and then stitching it all together as this like document through time. And just being able to share crazy VTuber clips and be able to talk about what a Subaru is and Korone and all that stuff was incredibly fun. And then you subjected me to Chaos Monopoly. That was a thing that happened too.
Indeed it was. All right, my number 2. If you've listened to us for any period of time, you know what number 2 and number 1 are. My number 2 is episode 291, the Game of Thrones episode, which came at the end of a period where Sean... So I had been watching it, obviously, in real time, and I'd been complaining about I had, yeah. But I'd been watching the show as it aired, complaining about the terrible, terrible final season that show has, and then Sean, as the final season was airing, started watching it from the beginning. And then, so this was a couple months after the finale aired. You had finished it. I'd gotten to a point where I had hated the ending, but was kind of over it. And then we did this episode where we had recorded, I don't actually remember what exactly, but we'd done other recording earlier in the day. And then we did this Game of Thrones conversation as this extra. It turned into its own episode. It is extremely punchy, but it is also us approaching this, these mostly the terrible final seasons of Game of Thrones, but not necessarily from the position of like raw anger a lot of people did when they first aired, but more of like, what the fuck is going on? Kind of crazy, punchy, like comedy almost. And it's a very entertaining episode that you and I have both gone back to, which is rare for us.
Yeah, that's my personal favorite one because I just think it's incredibly funny. And partially because it's like I don't remember that much of the experience of actually recording it.
I don't either.
Which is because we just recorded it so late at night. And I found it very funny. And it's funny because I also feel like even though I am not a particularly big fan of Game of Thrones, I didn't like the show that much even when it was good. I mean, I liked it, but I didn't love it. But I feel like partially, I don't know, from that podcast and because I've listened to the podcast and it's rare that I go and re-listen to a whole episode of our own podcast, I feel like I have such more of a like coherent and cogent memory of Game of Thrones than a lot of people who are big Game of Thrones fans, because I feel like a lot of people expunged it completely and just have forgotten about the fucking TV show. But like my favorite memory of Game of Thrones is this fucking podcast. So it's like I feel like I remember in really intense detail so much of season 7 and 8, the ending of Game of Thrones, because I've listened to the podcast episode and I found the jokes funny. And it's like a weird. My relationship to Game of Thrones is very weird. And that podcast is like the crown of that weird cake.
Absolutely. All right. And my number one, you all know what it is. It's episode 310, The Weekly Stuff Christmas Carol. You explain this one, Sean.
So, Jonathan, you've got you had your habit of coming up with very weird, bizarre topics for Christmas to sort of do. It started with the Pokemon Christmas album one, and we listened to some of those songs and talked about them. And then eventually, your behaviors escalated until eventually we got to the Christmas Carol one, where you found, what was it, like a church that had done a modified version of the Christmas Carol, injecting a lot of Christian themes and also setting it in the Old West. That's what it, right? That's where you
So this was actually a memory from my childhood when I had gone to, my parents had friends at a Baptist church who put on a Baptist version of A Christmas Carol that my family had made fun of ever since we saw it, because it was this super evangelical, like the end of it is like Jesus is on one side of the stage, Satan is on the other, pulling Scrooge in both directions. That's the kind of play it was. And I wanted to see if I could find that script, because I could just bet it came from some kind of like regional Christian play network. And I found a Christian play network online, but I didn't find the one I got from childhood. I found something better, which was the one you just described that did all that same evangelical shit, but in a Old West setting, like American Old West, John Ford-ass setting, and it was so bad, and I made you and me perform it live on the podcast, and Red Dead Redemption 2 had just come out, so you just did it in your Arthur voice from Red Dead 2.
Yes, and so it's less of a podcast and more of a radio play, that we are trying to do, just sort of off the cuff, reading through the script together. Yes, and it was right after Red Dead 2, so I was doing my best Arthur Morgan impression. And it was, but also because it was the first time I had read it, like running into just absurd shit that they had written, trying to fuse together these three very strange things, which is like a hardcore evangelical Christian bent with cowboys in the Wild West and Charles Dickens's A Christmas Carol. None of those three things really go together. Probably the closest matches the Christian with the Christmas Carol, but not that sort of shade of Christianity. And so, trying to sort of like go through that, and it's definitely the hardest I've ever laughed recording a podcast, trying to keep a straight face, saying that stuff, and some of the ridiculous shit in there. It's the weirdest and most insane thing we've ever done on a podcast, for sure.
Yeah, that's why it's my favorite. Are there any favorites of yours, Sean, that I forgot to mention?
Obviously the Game of Thrones one is the one that's big. It comes to mind. Obviously all the top 10 ones were always very fun to do. I agree that the top 10 books is the right choice. I liked any of the going back and reviewing old movies and as like a series. Like I really love doing the Batman ones, which is incredibly fun.
My only thing there was I just couldn't pick just one. I was looking at them, and so
any of those Batman episodes I think are great. And then all the a lot of things that stand out to me are like all of our classic Doctor Who stuff. So we had our sort of like classic Doctor Who 101 episodes. That was like a prototype for Weekly Suit Gundam. I don't even know if are those technically Weekly Stuff episodes, or is that its own podcast?
It's bonus episodes
Yes.
to the Weekly Stuff. They're on the Weekly Stuff channel and podcast feed, I believe.
So all those are very fun. And when we got to do good Doctor Who, which went away for a long time, and then it came back, and that was also a good time. So I like all the episodes that are recent enough that I don't feel embarrassed about my opinions from 10 years ago.
Let me tell you the one that was hard to cut for me because it's such a weird combination of topics. I wanted to put it on there, and I also think it's a really good set of conversations. But episode 476 was the one where in one episode we did Justified City Primeval and Final Fantasy 16. And that was the episode. And something about that Venn diagram says a lot about us.
Yeah, that's definitely a really, really strange juxtaposition. I didn't even remember that was the same episode.
Yep.
Fuck. What the hell is that podcast? That is a Weekly Stuff episode right there. That's why it was called the Weekly Stuff, Jonathan.
100%. All right, so Sean, what top 10 am I challenging you to create for October 2024? Sean, I have been led to understand that you watch a lot of anime. Is that correct?
I've been known to partake in the Japanimation. That is true.
Okay, so here's my challenge. I want you to make a list of the top 10 anime that do not incorporate the idea, if we work together and have friends, we can do it. Or as Persona 4 the animation put it, bonds of people is the true power. You need to make a list of 10 anime for which that thematic description, bonds of people is the true power, categorically does not imply.
So in other words, you want me to find the most cynical ass anime. The ones that's just like, no, we're fucked, man. I can do that. Oh, I can
Go for it.
I can do that.